All right. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening if you're joining us online or in person here in Stockholm. We're very happy to welcome you to our session, Engaging Local Faith Actors as Partners for Water, Sanitation, and Hygiene Sustainability. So first of all, this is an interactive presentation. We're going to ask our participants here to have a smartphone or your computer ready because we'd love to hear from your experiences as well throughout the presentation. We're going to use a Mentimeter. And we also wanted to let you know that interpretation services are available for this session in both French and Spanish. So once again, if you're in person here in Stockholm or online, you'll be able to access those through the World Water Week portal. So with that, would love to get started. So my name is Brandy Shackelford. I work at Living Water International, and I'm joined here with my colleague Ana Rivera. As well, we have our colleague Lindani Dube, who's joining us from Zimbabwe. You'll get to hear from him in just a couple minutes. And we're also here with some friends at Tear Fund and World Vision International. So in person, we have Frank Greaves. And then online from Mozambique, we have Salome Botau, as well as Dr. Ray Norman here in person, and Lindsay Lang joining us online from the United States. So we're going to start here with just a brief introduction. We're going to share our organizational experiences with you today, and you're going to be able to hear from a couple of faith leaders themselves and their experiences partnering with WASH organizations. But first, we want to hear from you all. So, like I said, this is going to be an interactive presentation. So if you can take out your smartphone, whether you're online or in person, and pull up this Mentimeter survey, we'd love to hear from you. Are you currently partnering with faith leaders in a WASH program? So take about 1 minute to answer that survey. Oh, sorry, let's try that again. So you might have to re-enter the Mentimeter here. All right, so that was a bit of a quick countdown, but it looks like a lot of us, obviously, who are interested in the session are already engaging with faith leaders and WASH programs, but we also have a couple of folks who haven't yet. So we hope this session will encourage you today to think about how this might look in your WASH programs. So just a very high-level overview before we jump in and hear from World Vision, Tear Fund, and Living Water on their experiences. But just wanted to set the stage on why we see value in both faith-based organizations and secular organizations alike, partnering with faith actors on WASH programs. So to start, we know the vast majority of the world identifies with a faith tradition, so about 84%. And in some places in the world, faith leaders are among the most trusted community leaders. Further, a lot of religious traditions and holy texts have mandates to do things the WASH sector cares about. So for example, in the Quran, there is instruction provided on various hygiene practices, such as hand washing. In the Hindu Dharma, there's some instructions on protecting the environment and watersheds. And then a lot of faith traditions have instructions on caring for the poor and vulnerable. So Judaism, Christianity, Islam, some traditions of Buddhism, to name a few. And of course, there's many other examples of this from different faith traditions, including traditional faiths as well. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Lindsay Lang, who's joining us online, and she's going to tell us a little bit about World Vision's experience.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. My name is Lindsay Lang, and I'm on the Water, Sanitation, and Hygiene team at World Vision International. World Vision is a Christian NGO that operates in nearly 100 countries globally with extensive WASH programming in 41 prioritized countries across 6 regions. Though we're a Christian organization, we serve people of all faith backgrounds. World Vision works primarily in rural communities around the world, most of which, as mentioned by Brandy, are inhabited by people of faith. As such, faith leaders are often trusted and influential leaders in their community. Faith leaders also often have the in-depth understanding of how complex issues impact their community, which puts them in a unique position to play a central role in any solutions. Faith leaders from different traditions also share values that include helping those in need, addressing injustices, and building community, which aligns with our values as an organization. World Vision began strategically working with faith leaders through our Channels of Hope model, which is a methodology for engaging and mobilizing faith leaders and faith communities to become active participants in issues impacting children in their communities. Since its launch in 2003, World Vision has trained more than 450,000 faith leaders through Channels of Hope. Using both science and insights from religious texts, Channels of Hope equips faith leaders to address beliefs, attitudes, and norms that harm child well-being in their communities. Channels of Hope was originally developed to address HIV/AIDS, but it's since been adapted for maternal, newborn, and child health, Ebola, COVID-19, gender, and child protection. During the Ebola outbreak in West Africa, Channels of Hope was used to train and mobilize more than 2,000 Christian and Muslim faith leaders in Ebola awareness, prevention, and stigma reduction. More recently, Channels of Hope was used to equip 88,000 faith leaders to share accurate health information and combat misinformation during the COVID-19 pandemic. One issue we've faced both at World Vision and as a sector is how to support sustained WASH-related behavior change in the places we work. Across our different regions, national offices have tried different strategies to engage faith leaders in WASH behavior change. In West Africa, we've adapted the Channels of Hope model and created a shorter WASH-specific module that's being used across different countries in the region. And we'd like to see it scaled to other regions in the future. So in West Africa, when we start a WASH program in a new area, World Vision staff meet with the local faith leaders of all traditions, such as Muslim, Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox, to start building positive relationships and invite them to a 2-day WASH workshop. This workshop is often led or supported by faith leaders from another region who've already participated in a previous workshop, or by other leaders who are more senior in the faith tradition or the denomination. The purpose is to strategically train and mobilize faith leaders to influence the WASH-related norms in their faith communities and encourage individuals to practice healthy WASH behaviors. At the start of the workshop, participants are briefed on how World Vision implements its WASH programs. Then they learn about the basic science of hygiene and disease transmission. And then each represented faith group is asked to share about their faith's perspectives on WASH-related behaviors, which are often supported by their holy scriptures, as Brandy mentioned. This last part is especially important in mixed faith settings so that participants from different traditions can see how much they have in common with each other. As a final activity, leaders are divided into groups by location, and together they develop action plans for their community. Some examples of activities in these action plans include faith leaders from various traditions visiting an elementary school together to talk about an aspect of WASH with the pupils, recording radio spots together, promoting the importance of hand washing, or working with the community to advocate with district or municipal authorities for better WASH services. The faith leaders who've been through this training might then become leaders in future trainings around the country. Some leaders have also continued to work with us to create tools for other faith leaders, such as sermon outlines or guidance specifically for pastors or for imams. The following video shows a World Vision faith leader workshop in Dakar. This particular workshop brought together national level imams and Christian leaders from across West Africa. And they developed guides and tools to help faith leaders from their respective faith traditions engage in WASH and hygiene promotion. Start the video, please.
The video is muted for virtual.
A significant part in World Vision's global effort to enhance the health of the communities it serves, especially child well-being. About 85% of the world's population are religious, and this is especially true in the poor communities where World Vision serves. World Vision is an openly Christian and faith-based organization, puts us in a very unique position to work to engage the community towards lasting behavior change when it comes to issues of water use and sanitation and hygiene performance.
Un vrai engagement dans les relations interreligieuses aboutira.
Over the past years in the West Africa region, we have begun engaging faith leaders in the communities where our WASH programs are starting up.
J'ai assisté à un atelier de WASH au Mali. J'ai appris l'aide que World Vision peut apporter à la population, aux différentes communautés, dans différents domaines. Et c'était formidable, c'était vraiment intéressant et ça valait la peine.
La première, c'est la rencontre entre les chrétiens et les musulmans. Le deuxième point, ce sont les leaders religieux de deux bords qui se retrouvent. Troisième, pour parler vraiment d'une question très importante dans la vie sociale.
In doing this, we also provide some training on water, sanitation, and hygiene practice, and we're thus able to mobilize them as advocates for hygiene-related behavior change in their own communities.
Si c'est le leader religieux qui se met devant et qui parle de l'hygiène et l'assainissement, la population, ou je peux dire les fidèles, le suivront.
Je me rappelle bien que nous sommes sortis un jour en train de balayer tout le quartier. Et cela est un exemple puissant de ce que lorsque le leader religieux a intégré un principe, il peut le communiquer à la population. Nous sommes ici à Dakar pour parler du WASH. Surtout, il nous a été demandé d'élaborer des argumentaires qui doivent servir à la sensibilisation de nos communautés respectives.
Our primary goal here is really to develop those two major documents, one for the Muslims and one for the Christians. And this is going really to help us for the next 3 days to work together from all over the region to build those materials for advocating in our communities.
Les deux documents seront lus comme ça.
Nous allons partir sur les Écritures saintes, soit le Coran ou la Bible. Les chrétiens vont travailler avec la Bible, les musulmans vont travailler avec le Coran. Et ça, en fonction de ça maintenant, les deux groupes vont essayer vraiment de se reconstituer pour voir les communs entre les deux groupes. Et là, on va constituer un document final qui sera pour l'humanité. Vraiment, il est important que vraiment les leaders religieux se retrouvent, partagent des idées, qui va pour l'intérêt, le bien-être de la communauté, qu'on se retrouve travailler ensemble.
Mais par exemple, si on montre une structure, un édifice religieux musulman et chrétien, et que l'eau coule entre les deux.
Moi, je pense qu'il faut mettre un chrétien, musulman, ou bien un chapelet, ou bien un Coran, Bible. Ça, c'est pas bon. Parce que ça, vraiment, il faut mettre quelque chose de naturel, qui peut associer vraiment l'humanité.
Donc, nous sommes dans la section du fondement théologique. Nous avons beaucoup pris du temps, parce qu'il faut trouver des versets dans la Bible qui justifient le problème de l'eau, le problème de l'hygiène, les maladies qui sont liées à l'eau lorsqu'elle est polluée, lorsqu'elle n'est pas propre à la consommation, et aussi les différentes maladies qu'on peut trouver dans l'eau.
Je voudrais m'appuyer sur Jean-Baptiste.
En termes de la purification et de la repentance.
Entre nous-mêmes, on a fait beaucoup de partage et on a compris que ça vaut la peine de partager ce qu'on a appris aujourd'hui avec d'autres personnes. Donc ce n'est pas un voyage inutile. C'est un voyage au retour au pays, on doit mettre cela à profit pour aider d'autres personnes.
Il y a des aspects que l'autre a vus et des aspects que l'autre n'a pas vus. Et ensemble, lorsqu'on met le travail ensemble, lorsqu'on compile le travail, lorsqu'on fait la synthèse, on se rend compte que le travail est beaucoup plus riche et beaucoup plus beau.
Et qui est ma théologie? C'est la mort de ma théologie là.
Merci à vous tous. C'était fait avec beaucoup de choix et beaucoup de joie et beaucoup d'engagement.
Je ne pensais pas qu'en ces quelques jours, 3 jours, qu'on pouvait élaborer de si grands, de si bons documents.
On a travaillé séparément avec les musulmans dans cet atelier, mais lorsqu'on est revenu ensemble pour présenter le travail, ce travail concorde exactement. C'est les mêmes défis, c'est les mêmes problèmes, c'est les mêmes recommandations de Dieu. Et cela est en soi quelque chose de très enrichissant.
C'est un bon document, c'est un guide pour vraiment le bien-être de la Oumma ou le bien-être de la communauté.
There were some other outcomes that were unexpected that were also encouraging. One was that these faith leaders coming together identified new areas where they can work together.
Un, c'est sur l'apport que nous devons apporter à la femme. Nous allons parler plus le bien-être de l'enfant et les personnes vulnérables.
The comments that so many of the faith leaders presented, that these documents, these resources will save lives in this region of the world.
What really struck me is to see faith leaders saying we cannot wait now to get this document finished and to engage in the communities. These people who represent about closely to 4,000 faith leaders with who we are working in this region.
Il est très important que les leaders religieux de différentes confessions se retrouvent pour travailler ensemble. Parce que le dialogue est très important dans la relation interreligieuse.
Travailler avec les leaders musulmans est pour moi quelque chose d'encourageant et d'enrichissant. C'est vrai, nous sommes différents dans nos pratiques religieuses, mais comme on dit en anglais, we don't need to be alike, to love alike. J'encourage mes collègues pasteurs à s'engager véritablement parce que c'est de la vie de nos enfants et de nos fils et de nos filles.
Great. So from experiences like this, we've identified a number of lessons that can help other organizations who are interested in working with faith leaders and watch programming. The first is that it's important to be aware of interfaith, ethnic, or denominational tensions that exist in the communities where you're working. Local staff are usually well aware of these tensions and can help navigate them to avoid any serious problems. At the same time, these tensions shouldn't intimidate us or prevent us from proceeding. Second, it's essential to establish rules of engagement at the beginning of faith leader workshops or other activities in mixed faith settings. It can be helpful to articulate a shared purpose, such as, how can we enhance the health of the communities we represent? Remind participants that they're there to focus on what they have in common rather than their differences, and try to avoid controversial topics that might distract from the purpose of the activity. Third, there will be faith leaders who are skeptical or reluctant to participate. They might be distrustful of the organization or of the other participants. However, if the workshop or other activity is compelling and you take care to avoid any tensions or controversial topics, most faith leaders are eager participants by the end. Faith leaders of different backgrounds discover how much they have in common. They build relationships and they develop habits of working together. Fourth, it's critical to engage national level faith leaders early on and to get their blessing. When the local level faith leaders are skeptical about partnering with your organization, the buy-in of the national leaders can help build legitimacy and trust. These national leaders can also participate in leading workshops across the country, which shows their commitment to improving child well-being through WASH and encourages other leaders of their faith tradition. Finally, it's important to help the faith leaders to implement their action plans when they return to their communities. Many faith leaders don't have resources available to start up new activities. After all, they're community members themselves. One option is to connect them to local program staff so they can collaborate in their planning and staff can provide practical support, such as transportation, flip charts, or other materials, or help with scheduling and coordination with other WASH activities that are going on. Excuse me. World Vision has spent a significant amount of effort in recent years on improving our ability to measure the impact of faith leader engagement on development outcomes. However, it's still a challenge and a work in progress. Our experiences so far has shown that it's very difficult to isolate the impact of faith leaders on behaviors or on child well-being apart from other interventions. So rather than continuing to try to establish those direct linkages, we've adjusted our theory of change so that our work with faith leaders is seen as contributing to an enabling environment that leads to improvements in child well-being. At this stage, as we continue to refine our thinking at the organizational level, we're encouraging staff at the program level to give thought to how this looks in their local WASH programs. It's been a pleasure being with you today. Thank you for your time. Next, you'll hear from Living Water about their experience partnering with Churches for WASH.
Together to take effective action in water, sanitation, and hygiene programs. And it focuses on providing the skills and the tools for the church to engage effectively and to support the community to improve WASH services and behaviors. Now, this model has been built on 3 decades of Living Water's experience and learnings, and it is in response to a need. It's in response to a need for a WASH model that integrates, that invites, but also focuses on such an important local stakeholder, in this case, the local church. In 2020, Living Water built on the Flourish model to develop a COVID-19 church response guide. Through this, we were able to train 14,500 church leaders in all the countries that we work in. And along with other interventions, this model helped us facilitate, help us contextualize the COVID-19 response to these local communities, being these local faith actors present in the communities and knowledgeable on what was needed in those communities. And it helped us to reach 6.8 million people with prevention, COVID-19 prevention messages. Now, Flourish proposes a 3-stage engagement model. And the first stage is envisioning and equipping the church. Now, this stage seeks to work with church leaders and church members to gain a shared understanding on their theological responsibility to serve communities. Now, through this stage, the churches and the church members, they envision together what the role of the church could be. They develop a vision on how the church can lead positive change in their own communities. Now, one key merit of this model is that it uses the language and the viewpoint tailored and contextualized to local faith actors. This means that it speaks the same language that these local faith institutions speak. Therefore, there is a direct ability and connection for the churches to understand WASH and to also understand what can be their potential role within a WASH-focused community development approach. Now, through this stage, there are envisioning workshops happening, there are church mobilization groups that are formed, and the focus is to bring church unity for collective impact. And one of the results that we often see is that we see a group of churches and church members who did not know each other, or they're coming from different spiritual backgrounds or spiritual practices, and they're coming together under one vision, focused on improving and sustaining WASH in their communities. Now, the second stage is facilitating church and community coordination. And through this stage, we support the church to work effectively with the community, where the church can understand the WASH situation and the WASH context in their community, can identify needs and resources, and also build together a shared plan of action. Water committees are engaged or even formed at this stage, and an inclusive community WASH plan is developed between the different local stakeholders, including now actively participating the local church. Now, through this stage, the church identifies its role and identifies how best they can support this community WASH plan. The third stage of Flourish is planning and taking action for WASH. Now, the goal of this stage is to increase WASH services and to improve WASH practices through community and church action together. Through this stage, skills and tools are learned in order to manage effective WASH action. Now, projects are planned together at this stage, stemming off from the community WASH plan, and capacity building processes are developed. Now, the interesting thing is that the skills and tools that both the church and the community learn together are not only applied to the WASH context, but there are skills and tools that they also continue to apply together based on other needs in the community. Now, through this process, faith actors identify with and take on different roles related to a WASH-focused community development approach. And part of those roles include they identify themselves as being messengers, where they open their doors to communicate about improved WASH practices. Others decide to have an implementer role where they support households and communities with attaining improved sanitation and hygiene services. Others decide to have an advocating role, and others decide to have a guardian role where they help communities maintain and monitor the gains that they have acquired. Now, this is different and looks different in every community, and that's okay. That's what we are expecting, because this is a model that is centered on the church, where the church determines and leads the way on how best they can support community transformation through WASH. So they decide how best to do it based on their own context. Now, there are many lessons we have learned through the years implementing this, and I would love to invite Reverend Dubé to share with us some of those lessons learned. Reverend?
Yes, thank you so much, Anna. I hope I'm coming out well there. Hi, everybody, and thank you so much, Brandy, for facilitating this, and thank you, Lindsay, for the presentation. As has been said, I'm Reverend Lendani Dube, based in Zimbabwe, and I serve as the Africa Regional Director for Church and Community Mobilization for Transformational WASH. There are indeed a few key learnings from engaging faith actors on WASH issues, but I would only focus on three main ones for the purpose of this presentation. First, there must be a strong engagement and effective envisioning processes over time with church leaders for them to see how engaging with their communities through WASH can be part of their mission. So what we have learned from this is that as churches carry out their mission, they find it much easier to embrace WASH activities given the need in communities and how the church's relevance is quickly realized as they embark in working with communities on WASH issues. I think it is quite clear that the need for WASH interventions in communities is very, very much in need. And therefore, the moment the church gets into that arena, its relevance becomes easily realized. Though at the beginning of engagement, some church leaders had concerns that WASH activities will divert giving or distract even from evangelism. You know that evangelism is at the core of churches, as it were. But with proper and adequate envisioning, church leaders realized that WASH is actually an effective catalyst for mobilizing the church. Not only the church across various church denominations or church structures, but even their own church themselves. And it helps the church develop a stronger vision for integral mission, also known as holistic mission, or the inseparable demonstration and proclamation of the gospel. Notwithstanding, especially in my context, that churches have limited resources, our engagement process ensures that churches are empowered to be aware of locally available resources which are at their disposal. And part of that involves the aspect of volunteerism, which is very rampant in the church. The second learning from engaging faith actors on WASH issues is that there is a historical hesitancy toward women assuming general leadership roles, despite the fact that women are key WASH stakeholders and primary water fetchers, as well as sustainers of household sanitation and hygiene. It is, however, noteworthy that as women take leadership roles in water committees and other WASH activities, churches often become more accepting of their leadership in the community. And we find that to be a very, very positive development where women get empowered to exercise leadership, to take leadership and responsibility in communities. The third learning from engaging with faith actors on WASH issues is that we noted that church engagement must be adaptable across different contexts and denominations. I think as you heard, Anna was mentioning that in different contexts, the flourish may present itself differently, and that in certain instances, it is done one way or the other, but within the framework of guidance that shows the need for it, therefore, to be adaptable. Churches look different in each context, in beliefs, in traditions, their theology, approach to ministry, and therefore church engagement must be adaptable depending on the context. Having spoken about these three learnings that we have deduced as Living Water International as we work with communities, I would like at this time to invite us to watch a brief video where we shall hear three church leaders share their experiences on how engagement with Living Water gave them capacity to work with their communities in water sanitation and hygiene issues. The first is a female church leader from Uganda who had tried to provide an unimproved source to her community before support from Living Water. Living Water support led to positive social impact which was driven by WASH initiatives. And the second part of the video is a church leader from Liberia who, after being engaged with living water during the COVID-19 period, mobilized the community to get a complex water system working again after it had broken for a very, very long time. And the third is a church leader from Rwanda who, after engaging with living water, mobilized the church to reach out to the entire community with sanitation facilities and enhanced hygiene promotion. Friends, I want to invite you to watch this brief video. Thank you so much.
My name is Reverend Moses K. Charles, a pastor of the United Methodist Church, Benga Administrative District, number 1, Liberia.
Nitwa Pasiteri Nshimiyumugaba Jules, nkorera umurimo w'Imana mu karere ka Ruhango, mu murenge wa Bweramana, mu mudugudu wa Kumunyinya, mu Rwanda. Nkaba nkorera mu itorero ryitwa Itorero ry'Ukwizera Church of Faith in Rwanda.
Living water najimanya okutandika 2019 omwezi ogw'omunana bwe batuyita ne tugenda ebukatabira ku ssomero ne tusoma awo ne bannonda okubeera worship promoter. Kanisa gye nkulembera twasomesebwa ne tukubiriza abantu mu trading center ne tubanga mwali mulimu abantu amaka 15. Tukozesa omukisa guno singa abantu baba bazze bangi mu nkungaana okutuusa ebigambo byabwe eri abakulembeze. Twegatta n'amasinzizo goona ku kyalo ne twogera eddoboozi limu. Mu nkungaana z'omu kyalo twongera okukubiriza okwogera ku mazzi ne ku by'obuyonjo. Buli mwezi akakiiko k'ab'ebuyonjo ak'ekkanisa katambula nga kabakubiriza okuzikozesa n'okuzirabirira. Ekkanisa yange yasigala esomesa abantu okukozesa tooyi n'okuzirabirira. Amaka bwe gatereera ne tubayigiriza okusaba amazzi mu living water ne bawandiika amabaluwa ne bagatuwa ne tugatwala. Ekkanisa yaffe yasomesa obukiiko bw'amazzi, endabirira n'ensolo za yessente. Twakubiriza enkiiko mu kyalo engeri y'okusabamu amazzi n'okukuuma zi borehole. Abantu bwe baakola obuyonjo ne tuyita ab'eggombolola n'aba district. Bwe baamala okulambuula ne tufuna amazzi n'obuyonjo ne bweyongera.
Before we went for the workshop, there were motor pumps built in our community. Because there was no proper management and maintenance, the pump break down. And the pump was down for a year. And then when I heard that Living Water Family is calling for workshop for pastors, I went there and I learned a lot of things. And from there, I was excited to go back to my community, to work with my community leaders, to see what can we do for the pump to come back to service for the community people. Immediately, I met up with few prominent members who went to meet the chairperson at that time. The plan we carried to him, we presented the plan, and everybody was happy with the plan. Then immediately he listened to us. Immediately a meeting was called. When the meeting was called, after the meeting, the young people of the community, joined us. As I speak to you now, that motor pump is functional now, it functions.
Biriya baduhugura ku isuku n'isukura, batwigishije byinshi natwe tujya kubitoza abandi. Uruhare tugira mu guhindura imyumvire y'abantu, dufite itsinda ryigisha abantu isuku n'isukura rihoraho. Tubatoza gusukura amazi, gusukura imigezi n'ibindi. Ubuvugizi twagize mu kuvugira abaturage, twigeze gusaba amabati yo gusakarira abatishoboye ngo tugere hirya no hino ibikorwa dukora mu by'isuku n'isukura mu itorero ryacu twagerageje kubakira abatishoboye ubwiherero bwiza imiryango 5.
Even though we preach the gospel, but it will not be only the preaching of the gospel, but also do by action. I learned at that workshop, the church needs to play a key role in community work and in awareness. And then from there, I was challenged to go back into my community.
Ekyalo kikyuse balina amazzi era basula mu maka amayonjo. Fenga ekkanisa twali tetumanyi nti tulina amaanyi agasobola okuyamba abantu. Living Water bwe yatukwata ku mukono ne tukola emirimu, abantu bayongera okutukkiririzaamu.
Yes, thank you so much, friends. Thank you for watching this video, friends. I hope you enjoy the experiences of these faith leaders as they played a notable role in WASH and working with their communities to improve the livelihoods of individuals in the community. Now, Living Water's Flourish Guide and the resources are available for free online. If you want to learn more, visit water.cc/flourish. Now, I want to hand you over to my colleague, who is a tier funder, to tell us more about their experience in engaging faith actors on WASH issues. Over to you, Frank. Thank you, friends.
Great. Thank you, Lindani. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Good morning. My name is Frank Greaves, and I work as the WASH lead for Tier Fund based in the UK. And I'm going to share with you this morning our experience of engaging faith leaders in the humanitarian context in particular. Do you know, just standing here this morning and I'm looking out and I saw 1 or 2 people coming in, it's just great to see people from the faith background as well. We kicked off in Stockholm World Water, didn't we, just before COVID? And lovely to see those people again here. So welcome. So Tier Fund, founded in 1968, is a relief and development agency working in these 3 themes of humanitarian response, community development, and advocacy and influencing. And just like my colleagues have said from World Vision and Living Water, though we're a Christian-based agency, we extend assistance to all people, regardless of their religious beliefs, gender, or ethnicity. In the development context, Tier Fund's approach is to envision and equip the church in practical ways to work with the local community, identifying needs and mobilizing resources to bring about restoration and transformation. Now, the process is open-ended, and the resulting initiatives are managed by the church and the community together. Unlike the example, Anna, that you shared on Living Water, our process in Tier Fund isn't necessarily with the objective, it's the greatest needs of the community are going to be WASH. It could be anything, food security, even education, but it's nearly always the case that WASH appears in the top 3 needs, and it's often a component of a community's wider holistic development mission, and it's this holistic well-being that I think in Tier Fund we're particularly keen to follow. So, in the humanitarian context, we work across, as I said, all faith-based groups and optimizing their resources, which you can see on here. I've just highlighted the key resources, and that would involve the compound, the building. That's a great resource of the faith-based group. Of course, the people. Whether that's the general congregations, the general participants of the faith, and organized subgroups which raise awareness of disaster risks, particularly bringing together the community to make plans and reduce those risks. And then, of course, a great resource is having the experience to help disaster survivors to cope with the emotional distress of losing family, friends, and possessions. So what I'm going to do now, folks, is I'm going to give you a final example from overseas. We have a colleague of mine, Salome Botau. She is a finance manager in Mozambique and has followed strongly the connection of the church response, local church response, with the many hurricanes and cyclones which have occurred, well, since we were last here, and what the church has been doing in that context. So thank you, and I'll come back to you afterwards. And just to say, at the end of my piece, we'll be having a panel discussion, so do keep awake for that and get your questions ready. So, Salome, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Like Frank has said, my name is Salome, and greetings to you all at the Stockholm World Water Week. I'm going to present to you the case study that was done in Mozambique on the engagement of faith-based groups in WASH during emergency response. In 2019, during the rainy season, Mozambique was hit by one of the deadliest and strongest tropical cyclone in Africa, named Cyclone Idai in the Sofala province, and followed by the Cyclone Kenneth in the Cabo Delgado province. These cyclones affected an estimate of about 1.8 million people. Due to the climate changes, Mozambique has been experiencing natural disasters caused by cyclones. Cyclone Ana and Cyclone Gombe came as a surprise to many people early this year, as it affected areas historically known to be dry areas, even during the rainy seasons. These events have caused significant damages to houses, agricultural land, and important infrastructures, and not to mention lives that have been lost. On the other hand, the rapidly intensifying conflict events that happened in the north of the country, in the Cabo Delgado province, has worsened the humanitarian needs by displacing over 784,000 people. TFund has been responding in this humanitarian crisis since 2019 in collaboration with its partners and faith-based groups, working with faith leaders to provide assistance to the internally displaced people. We have been working with the Christian Council of Mozambique, the Anglican Diocese of Nampula, Food for the Hungry, and the United Church of Christ in Mozambique. The key WASH interventions aimed at improving access to sufficient and safe water services to the affected people. These WASH responses were pertinent to the prevailing COVID-19 situations at the time. The activities included distribution of WASH kits, construction and rehabilitation of water system networks and latrines, training the communities on managing and maintaining these facilities, training of health and hygiene promotion activities at household and community levels. Faith leaders were engaged during the needs assessments, assisting the government on priority areas to respond to. It could be WASH, it could be livelihoods, so they would support or give guidance also to the government on what to respond to. Coordinating activities with local government and the WASH cluster in the affected areas, participating in as well as being part of the water management committees. They've also received disaster risk reduction trainings, and they were providing personal assistance and counseling to the affected people. This has been very effective in the northern part of Mozambique, where the conflict is happening now. Faith leaders participated actively in all stages of the project implementation, from mobilizing and identifying vulnerable beneficiaries, identifying the prevailing needs and priorities in distribution of items, interacting with families, spreading messages of good hygiene practices, encouraging families to comply with the protocols of hand washing and keeping drinking water safe, also advocating for peace in communities affected by the conflict. They also referred cases of health to health facilities where they thought special attention was needed. The learnings we got from this case study is that monitoring of hygiene practices continue with support from faith leaders at local level after NGOs have moved out of the communities or when project implementation period comes to an end. They also help with to encourage the people or in the communities to use resistant material, since we know that during the emergency, it's usually not very strong material that is used maybe to build latrines, but thereafter they advocate that the communities opt for stronger materials. And we also realized that no cholera outbreak happened due to open defecation during these emergencies, since the displaced people were housed in open spaces. This did not happen because of the timely hygiene and sanitation awareness in the camps. Religious leaders from different denominations worked together to restore their communities besides the differences of their faith. One of the challenges that was mentioned or that came back from the feedback mechanisms that we had was that some of the faith leaders were favoring members of their own communities in the response activities. Emergency response involving faith leaders has been a new learning in Mozambique, and we believe that this attitude will change in the future. They would also begin to understand what it means to diversify and to include different people from different sectors. The impact we had in these responses was that improved access to sufficient and safe wash services for an estimated of about 26,210 disaster-affected people and improved hygiene practices. Approximately 150 faith leaders were involved in wash activities during the emergency situations. The church continues to lead disaster management committees, arranging volunteering and supporting wash committees. And after the emergencies have been finished. So I want to thank you all for listening, and I give back to Frank.
Have in Tier Fund various tools on preparing and helping faith-based groups to prepare their communities for disaster response, particularly disaster preparedness training, preparedness plans, action plans, and how to engage with governments, referral systems and the like. So we have a particular learning website. It's called Tier Fund Learn. There's the site on there, and I think all of you will be getting the slides anyway afterwards. So do visit that. A great one there, we feel, Keeping the Faith, which we did with the Islamic Relief and CAFOD on the response to COVID. Great. So, oops, I think I've got to go back one. So I hope you're persuaded that faith-based groups have a unique and valuable role to play in humanitarian contexts. Because it's when people, whatever their background, are at their most vulnerable. And isn't that where the faith-based groups are supposed to be? But my message to you this morning is to yoke the help of faith-based groups in humanitarian programs, whether it's WASH or any other sector actually. But don't wait. Do it before the emergency. And when you do so, don't engage with faith-based groups solely as a group of volunteers, but as an equal partner. We usually see subcontracting of faith-based actors to implement perhaps predefined work rather than partnering with them to develop response projects. And depending on the type and context of the emergency response, the faith-based groups may well need training. They will, that's a certain. But recognize that they too can offer agencies training, contextual training, which will make the difference in impact. So as I said, don't wait for emergency to occur and get involved through the church and through faith-based groups to prepare those disaster risk preparedness plans and action plans. Recognize as well that the local faith-based groups are going to be part of the same community in need. That was said before by my colleagues. And they'll have much to offer in terms of assessing needs and reaching the hardest to reach. We also need to recognize, finally, that the churches and other faith-based groups will have their needs just as we do, particularly if their land or their building has been damaged. Do you know, it's almost a cliche, isn't it? You're thinking, okay, here we are in emergency response. Yeah, here's the faith-based groups. We want to yoke their help, sure, but aren't they going to ask, for example, for a new roof for the church or for the mosque? I would say this is a great investment. It is part of that response plan. One day, the affected community, your target beneficiaries, and even your agency, even yourselves, may be sheltering under that same roof. And in terms of WASH, the church or mosque roof usually provides the largest water harvesting catchment in the community anyway. And come a disaster, the latrine blocks and how to use them, that demonstration model will be a godsend to you all. Let me leave you with this quote from a church leader in Latin America, because when we all go home after the emergency, guess who remains behind? Thank you for listening. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Frank. So now, as we talked about at the beginning, many of you have valuable experiences working with faith-based groups as well. So we're going to ask for your engagement again, whether you're online or in person. If you can pull up our Menti code and tell us what aspects of WASH programs are the most suitable for partnering with faith leaders, either in your experience or after hearing this presentation if you don't have direct experience working with faith leaders yet. So go ahead and take a minute to respond to that. See a couple responses coming in here. So a couple of people agree on behavior change, long-term field presence, capacity building, communications to scale up partnerships in the future. And that code's at the top again if you missed it before. Hygiene and behavior change overall regarding inclusion, community engagement, environmental assessments and identification of stakeholders, awareness raising, strategic planning for food security. Wonderful, all great answers. So what we're going to do now is I'm actually going to invite our panelists up. And stay there on the Menti for me, because we're going to ask you to ask some questions for our panelists using that same Menti code. All right. So in hopes of making this an inclusive session for our online participants, once again, rather than taking questions live, we're going to ask you to ask them via the Menti. But just want to remind you of a couple of our panelists. I know you've heard it from a few of them already, but we have Reverend Lindani Dube online and Salome Botau online. In addition, we have Dr. Ray Norman, the Global WASH Lead at World Vision International, as well as Frank Greaves, the WASH Lead for Tear Fund, and then Ana Rivera with Living Water International. So as we get some of those questions coming in, I'm going to start us off with a question. So I am going to ask Dr. Norman to start. In your experience, what are some of the most realistic ways secular organizations or non-faith-based organizations can partner with faith actors in their programs?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Brandy. You've heard today from 3 organizations, all 3 of which are Christian faith-based organizations, but I think it's very important for us to remember that secular organizations can certainly engage with faith actors and faith leaders, and many of you representing secular organizations are already doing that. I think the most important thing, though, when a secular organization wants to begin thinking about how to engage faith actors in the areas they work, it's important to sit down and think about what are our common values. What are the common values that my organization shares with this particular faith group? It requires learning a little bit about that faith group, but you will certainly find common values. It may be child well-being. It may be protecting the environment. The list just is almost endless, but identifying those common values and having some knowledge of them before you approach the faith community will certainly start you on the right track. So that, to me, that's incredibly important. Once you're functioning together, of course, the sky really is the limit. So I'm going to stop there. Maybe one of our other panelists may have something else to offer on that.
So just to add on to that, for any partnership to be effective, there needs to be trust, right? And this certainly applies to local faith institutions. So as initiating any partnership, you also have to start with the desire to engage and also the desire to listen and understand your partner. And that is what, as part of the Flourish model, we're trying to promote. It's just a common understanding of who the faith actor is in order to talk at the same level with the same understanding. And of course, that can bring forth a very good, fruitful, long-term partnership with any local faith institution.
Great, thank you. So for our next question, we have, how does partnership look different in emergencies versus development situations? So maybe I'll direct that. Frank, I know you spoke specifically about emergencies, but Tear Fund also does development work as well.
Yeah, sure, thank you. Great, I'll give a few ideas and then perhaps Salome might have something to add. Well, of course, we're in partnerships in development context even now. So our church-based partners in the various countries we work, they'd be trained, they'd be ready, they'd be doing church community mobilization work, just as Living Water will be. In the humanitarian context, the local church, they will need training. The big difference is they are there, ready and waiting. Ironically, they're going to be the first people on the ground responding before we even get to them. And yet they need training. And I think it's about a true partnership, but it's a partnership that you need to get involved with now and not wait. I think another part of that partnership or that engagement process is our own teams. Really to strengthen faith literacy amongst your own agency. Yeah? especially at field level, there's not a lot of appreciation of what the church can bring or the faith-based group can bring. So get working with your teams and get to know people, get those relationships moving now, and get people understanding of the empowerment and the value added that the local faith-based partner can bring. Salome, have you got anything on that question? How does partnership look different in emergencies compared to the development situations?
Yeah, maybe I'll give, like, in the current context of Mozambique, we had been doing development more, and humanitarian response only started in Tier Fund in 2019 when we were surprised by the cyclone Idai. So what we realized is that most organizations or NGOs capacity built their teams. And then we realized that we also needed to change the way we were doing things to also involve the churches and Christian organizations in these trainings of disaster and risk reduction. And we've also done trainings of core humanitarian standards so that if anything ever happens in the future, the church is prepared to right from the start until the end, and to know, and to also maybe for organizations to think of the exit strategy, that really the church is within the community and they're going to be there, and that the first contact with the people in after the emergencies also happen, they are there to support into development of any other projects that are outcome of these emergency responses.
Thank you, Salome. Okay, so our next question says, how do you ensure the involvement of different religious sects in the communities to ensure that no rift is caused by engaging the local faith leaders? So I think Tier Fund talked a little bit about one of the learnings was the faith-based groups were sometimes, targeting interventions towards their communities. So how do we make sure they target interventions to all communities and that we engage different religious sects in the communities? Question for anyone who wants to answer.
Sure. I could start sharing the experience with our Flourish model. Church envisioning, or the envisioning process, the collective envisioning process, is key for us. That's why we start with that process where we invite the different local leaders to come together under one roof and envision together a collective community wash plan. That allows us to ensure that all the voices are at the table, or the different viewpoints, and that causes unity among the different sects, among the different churches as well, in order to come together under one common vision. And the end result to that has, or can end up in being, a more balanced approach and a more inclusive approach as well among the different local faith actors.
We had experience as well in the Ebola response, how working with the Muslim groups, we would be looking at the theology, just like in World Vision in their examples as well, and bringing a theological context, which has such a strong influence on behavioral change. So seeing common theological context of keeping clean, of respecting other people, of not defecating in the open. And these commonalities can be a great, can really bind the effort overall with different faith-based groups.
I think it's also important to remember in interfaith context, when you have communities of different faiths, you may have situations where faith leaders of those different communities have never really sat down and engaged together. And I think that's something that our organizations, any of us who represent relief and development organizations, can help to facilitate, bringing those community leaders together, helping them to develop habits of working together, develop common understanding for the needs in the community. really goes a long way, and it's one of the important services that our organizations can render.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. And on the subject of theological training, we have a good question here about how do we prevent the practice of picking and choosing verses in Holy Scriptures for the weaponization of the holy books by those in power. So how do we both leverage theology but also prevent it from being weaponized in the WASH programs? Any thoughts on that?
Whoa.
Tough question.
I'll jump in. I'm not sure I have the answer, but you know, I remember being in, I think it was Zambia, and I was in the community where the church had been very involved with our WASH advocacy in the community, and we visited this gentleman. Visited his home, and it was impeccable. He had, you know, it was well swept. He had a very clean latrine, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, why do you keep your house so clean and practice good hygiene? He said, well, because if I don't, God will not like me. And to me, that was a classic example of perhaps what this person is trying to get at. We have to be very careful. I mean, the reason, the response I had hoped to get was because I care for my family, I care for my community, I care for the well-being of my household. But I think again, when you bring faith leaders together, either of the same faith or even in interfaith context, they help to temper this tendency that has been referred to. So again, bringing pastors together, bringing imams together, bringing priests together to dialogue and discuss and debate about holy text will temper any potential abuse of those texts. I'm not sure if that was an answer, but whatever.
No, that's good.
Good.
Yeah.
I think it was a great answer. And kind of on the subject of complexity, I guess you could say, as we saw in the videos, you know, faith leaders are largely men. So we have a question here. At what stage in your interventions and how are women included in the process of planning behavior change measures? And we have another question about, is menstrual hygiene management or menstrual health and hygiene also included in your programs? And what does that look like when we're engaging with faith leaders? More taboo topics like that.
Well, in World Vision, we certainly talk about the taboo subjects. We certainly talk about menstrual health among faith leaders, and when we do that, if the group of faith leaders we're working with are predominantly men, it immediately raises the discussion and the question among them, we need to find ways to involve women on this. So by actually bringing up the topic of menstrual hygiene management, it can incentivize, we have found that it can incentivize male faith leaders to be more proactive in engaging women. Now, I forgot what the first part of that question was.
At what stages are women incorporated into the process?
And engaging women is a challenge because the majority, in our experience, the majority of faith leaders that we engage, not exclusively, but the majority are male. And so we very quickly try to find ways to bring up the discussion of how do we involve women who represent some aspect of faith leadership. In many cases, you may have men who are the actual faith leader of the community, but even in those communities, they may have informal leaders. In many, you have formal female leaders, but in many, you have informal female leaders that deal with certainly issues around women and children, and exploring ways of involving them either in the training and in the mobilization of faith actors and faith leaders is very, very important.
Thanks, Ray. Reverend Dubé, if you're with us, do you also want to speak to that a little bit with your experience with living water?
Yes, Brandy, just to echo my voice on what is already been said, in particular with our work in Africa, where the societies are predominantly patriarchal. But maybe let me begin also from what was spoken of before, the issue of making sure that we don't use the gospel to either patronize communities. One of the things that we've done as Living Water International is to be intentional on our quality standards. And our quality standards ensure that we engage every religious leader, and that it is intentional that while we do so, we allow people to make their decisions, but with the ultimate goal for us to see communities being transformed and seeing well-being all way around. Regarding women, like what one panelist has already said, and again, like you've heard in the video, which was played earlier on, women are very critical in terms of WASH issues, in particular, given that they are the ones who on a day-to-day basis who deal with water issues. So that is given a caveat in the process, given that as they get involved in water committees, for example, in Living Water International, it then is given some way for men to support them in that process. Besides, ordinarily, men would not want to be seen carrying buckets to go and fetch water. But automatically, because women are doing so, it gives them an opportunity for them to get involved in providing leadership in water committees. And that way, it then helps for men to appreciate and begin to give them some room to play. And we have seen that play very well when we're working in the water communities. Thank you so much, Brandy.
Thank you, Reverend Dubé. All right, oh, go ahead. Oh, sorry, I thought someone had something. So next we have here someone asking about how we might be able to equip local leaders to handle difficult situations like challenging misinformation. So do you all have any experiences with that in your programs?
Well, if I may, one very interesting learning out of the COVID response in Sierra Leone and Liberia was in 2014 was the fact that the health facilitators, the health workers, would give a message. It would be as accurate as they knew. It would be very biomedical. It would be very pointed, and yet it would generate some fear, some angst in the community. Yeah, it was harsh, and what faith leaders were able to do there was turn that very accurate, correct information into a message of hope. So from a message of fear into a message of hope. Bring about a theology with it, support it, talk through it in a different way. And this made the difference to understand and to change this message into something that was understood and taken to heart by the community, despite that biomedical message being accurate. So the issue, for example, of burial rites and how to dispose of the bodies and so on, that was very key. You can say it in two ways, but and actually it's not to say that just leave it to the faith-based groups. No, it's the faith-based groups working with the health centres, with the health professionals, and I think that's what made the difference. Thank you.
Thank you.
May I add to that?
I'd love for you to.
The whole question of misinformation can happen at various levels and at different places, but you have the issue of misinformation in the community. For example, in Ebola, there was a lot of misinformation around Ebola within the community. You can also have misinformation between different faith groups. You can also have misinformation between the community and the organization that's trying to assist the community. And in all of these three contexts, and we could think of others, it's always helpful to have faith leaders on your side, so to speak. And as has already been discussed by a number of people this morning, engaging faith leaders before, I think you said, before the disaster hits. Well, engaging faith leaders before misinformation comes around is very important. And being sure that trust is built between the organization and the faith leaders before you have to deal with issues of misinformation. The other thing I think is important here in dealing with any type of misinformation in the community is being sure that you have already engaged national level leadership in your representative faith groups. Because sometimes, at times, local faith actors can be actually part of that misinformation. And when you're dealing with that context, if you've already established trust and a relationship with national leaders, national imams, pastors, priests, etc., you can go to them, and usually they are very helpful in sorting out these issues of misinformation and even miscommunication.
And just to add to that, through the church mobilization groups that were developed at a community level, this provided also a local network where different faith groups could come together and have the same information together. Because the process we develop and apply implies church unity from the beginning and creating trust from the beginning, that helps to create one front in the community where all these different actors can come together and have access to the same information, and as one front be able to share the same information together. So the idea of networks at a national level is incredibly important as well, just echoing that. And that network approach where all can come together, have access to the same information together, and therefore can disseminate the information as well in our own different places.
Wonderful. So I have several questions on. Oh, please go ahead. Is that you, Reverend?
Yes, I just wanted to add something on what Anna has just said in terms of networks. We also ensure that we work with authorities in any given area. That is why our engagement with the government is very, very key, and that helps us curb issues of misinformation, and also ensures that churches are well capacitated with the correct information that they need. All right, thank you so much, Manny.
Several questions here about how we monitor and evaluate the impact of working with faith leaders. So I know a couple of folks talked about that in the presentation, but would anyone like to speak to how your organization monitors and evaluates your activities with the faith leaders or faith-based groups?
Is that monitoring the activities or monitoring impact? Could you clarify the question?
We have questions about both, so speak to whichever you'd like.
Well, I'll just say quickly, we have a program in southwest Uganda. Anybody here from Uganda? Yeah? Hi. Okay, in Kigezi Diocese, Kabale District, and the Kigezi Diocese Water and Sanitation Program is actually an arm of the Evangelical Church, Church of Uganda, and is actually an advisor to the government. It's very much down in that district to 40 or more women's groups who regularly, on a monthly basis, would take a sample visiting in their communities to find out about adherence to what has been agreed on the use of springs and water projects, but also to find out and monitor health-based benefits. And then that would be fed back to Kigezi Diocese. So that's a lovely way of being involved on the ground. They do it themselves. It's not that there's the NGO or TAFE funders there, it's their own organisation. So that's lovely. That's done through women's groups locally and regularly.
Wonderful.
So for our Flourish model, we also have a monitoring and evaluation framework that accompanies it as well. And it evaluates both or monitors both activities and impact at different levels. It uses several methodologies such as interviews and others, but it does go par and par in really trying to see this process. So this is a model that's very much focused on the process and the end result of that process resulting in that unity, but more than not also, because it's a WASH-focused model, resulting on improved WASH access and improved behavior as well. So the framework goes par and par with the different stages that we implement from this model approach that we're implementing.
Great. Any final thoughts from our panelists before we wrap up our session here?
Don't wait. Don't wait.
Okay. Salome or Reverend Dube, anything to add? Okay, I think we're going to head towards our couple of key takeaways here that we want you to walk away with today. So our main takeaway is this first one. Religious institutions are trusted long-term social structures in many communities. And we know this is especially true for rural communities and low and middle income countries. And they have deep local knowledge, they're grassroots organizations, and this really uniquely positions faith actors in communities to help achieve and sustain WASH for all. So like many people said, these faith leaders are community members themselves. They can help represent their interests. Often faith leaders are experts in shaping behavior and have religious mandates to do things that the WASH sector cares about. And finally, they play an important role in advocacy and the mobilization of community resources. We saw many examples of this during the COVID-19 pandemic or the Ebola epidemic, that faith leaders can mobilize their communities quickly. And truly, as a sector, if we value inclusion, we can't overlook these crucial community stakeholders. We have to think about how to engage them in our programs. Second, many religious institutions have an international presence, like we talked about, as well as their local and national presence. So you can think about the Catholic Church, for example. And so that allows us to advocate to stakeholders at many levels. And then finally, effective partnership requires a commitment to contextualization as well as engagement over time. So as our panelists talked about before, envisioning is often required to help faith leaders understand the theological basis for partnering on WASH and sustaining WASH in their communities. Often it's helpful to establish MOUs between the organization and the faith leaders to outline what that partnership's going to look like over time. And also that we use programmatic models that are contextualized to each theology. We talked about, there's many interfaith differences, obviously, but even there's denominational differences and nuances that we have to be aware of. And we also, on the subject of interfaith, just talked about how challenges in collaboration can often be avoided by really establishing rules for interfaith dialogue with stakeholders and focusing on what we have in common instead of what we don't. And this often can have the added benefit of long-term peacemaking in communities. So with that, I'm going to leave you with a slide where you can find some more information about all three organizations. So Living Water, we have our Flourish page, with which Reverend Dube shared before, as well as an email address you can reach us at. Tier Fund also has a resource page and a website and an email. And World Vision has an email you can reach them at as well. And I believe our panelists will be hanging out here for a couple minutes if you want to come up and connect. So we just want to thank you all for your time and hope you enjoy the rest of your World Water Week.
Thank you.